Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who the Corps issued a rifle, not wings.
Tim Longo.
That is one of those hoorah, statements I heard from somebody at some point. I think it's in the section where you're going up to the truth and reconciliation, maybe? I can't remember what the context was where this, I guess because you beam up or whatever into that ship. And maybe that's where it happens. But it was one of these weird throwaway lines that just some random grunt says, and that one stuck with me. We are turning, of course, to a new series about 2001's Halo Combat Evolved, and that evolution is something we'll definitely talk a lot about this time. But do you want to set the stage a little bit for 2001 in games, or do you need me to do that?
No, you can go ahead. I think you have the list better.
I have it. I have a huge list.
In. I mean, this was a busy year for. It's a
year that we have returned to again and again and again. So we have done in no particular order. They're just as I noticed things or whatever, and then I finally went to the site. But we've done GTA 3, Silent Hill 2, Eco, Civilization 3, Anachronox, Animal Crossing, Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, and Devil May Cry. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yes. This is our 9th game from 2001. We're going to have to give 2001 a rest. We're kind of wearing it out. That's 1.5 games per year of the podcast spent in 2001. But it was also, I was thinking, looking at the difference sort of between PC games at the time and I'm just picking some titles, but sort of a general vibe was like the consoles were Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, Super Smash Bros. Melee. I have Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 here. It's quite a good entry. Jak and Daxter, Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. There are tons of others. There's also some, Game Boy Advance was hot at the time. So like Advance Wars this year. Yeah, huge one. But then I looked at like the PC, and the sort of big titles that stood out to me there were Max Payne, which also came out on the Xbox this year, a little bit after Halo, Black and White, Dark Age of Camelot, Baldur's Gate 2. So actually kind of an ebb for shooters this particular year. I didn't see a lot of first-person shooters in 2001, which was a little surprising to me. I mean, I'm sure there are some, and I didn't exhaustively comb through, but in the sort of top 30 or 40 games that kind of come up when you search for it, not a lot of shooters. I mean, Max Payne's a third-person shooter with the bullet time, and I think that would have a big impact over the next few years on PC shooters. And I think things like, like Painkiller and whatever, that sort of wave of stuff, and Doom 3, right, were coming a few years later. So it was kind of in a weird lull, and you're seeing some MMOs were becoming big. Dark Age of Camelot was maybe the last big one before WoW. Is that right? That feels like it to me. Maybe EverQuest 2 or Asheron's Call came in around that time, but that's a big one.
Yeah, they were all competitors. Yeah, I migrated from EverQuest to Dark Age. Yeah, and then to WoW. Yeah.
I mentioned Baldur's Gate 2, of course, because we played Baldur's Gate. A massive sequel. I mean, that game's like twice as long, 3 times as long. It's really absurd, to be honest.
It's too long.
Yeah, it's too long.
I think.
Agreed. And into this mix comes Bungie, who were known previous to this for two series, or two, I guess, dyads, because I think they both just had 2 games, but Marathon and Myth, which came out, I think, a couple years before. I don't have the date right in front of me. Marathon, of course, was and its sequel, Marathon Durandal, I think, or Marathon 2 Durandal, were big hits on Max. It was the one shooter, really, that you thought of when you thought of Max. It's one of those rare FPSs where I'm like, I never got a chance really to play much of that. Did play a little multiplayer of it once. And
97 was Myth.
97 was Myth. Oh, interesting. And Myth 2 was the one that just took a while to get out then.
98 it says.
Really? Oh, okay.
And then the third one was 2001, which was the same year, which is weird. I don't remember the third one.
I don't. I'm going to look that up because that sounds weird. Video game series Myth. Oh, yeah, there was a third one. I don't remember Myth 3. Was that somebody else made that, maybe?
No. It says the Wolf Age. I don't remember. It's on the same
It was
page.
developed by Mumbo Jumbo, and yeah, so it was not. This is after. This was part of the deal. Yeah, no, they don't own it. They don't own Myth, and that's kind of why we've never seen another Myth from something bigger, because that was actually part of the deal. In order to get Myth 2 done and kind of keep going, they sold a small. So they got Myth 2 done. Take-Two Interactive, I think, was the publisher, and they announced what would become Halo, and it even maybe had that name at the Apple Developers or Worldwide Conference or whatever at an Apple keynote that year in 2000, I guess, late 2000. And they ended up having to sell a bit of the company to Take-Two, who were funding stuff. And at the time, they were starting to get in the hole. And they ended up going to Microsoft and Ed Freeze, and who was heading up this this new console, and saying, hey, what about us coming over? And as a result, Take-Two got Myth and Oni IPs, and Xbox got, I guess, Marathon technically, and Halo, the game that they were basically buying them to finish and launch on this console. And they ended up having less than a year to go from a game that had started as an RTS, turned into a third-person sort of action-adventure game where you could drive vehicles, so that's where that came from. And they had to turn it into a first-person shooter on a console in 11 months. And that's kind of astonishing to me. Like, I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, you can do a lot in 11 months. But it's a big ask considering where they ended up. Because this, of course, is, maybe the definitive console FPS for its sort of generation. I mean, it just showed us all that, oh yeah, you could do that. Like, I don't know about you, Tim, but when I was playing Doom, back on LANs, in the graphics lab, I was like, yeah, that mouse lick's never going to catch on. I mean, I was like, oh, no way. I'll always, keyboard for life, WASD and arrow keys, I guess, or something. I don't even honestly remember how you would do that. I was wrong about that, and I was also wrong about an FPS doing well on a console. So what are your recollections back then?
Yeah, I mean, the Macworld demo was so as we see in the first section that we've played, there is a sort of element of I guess what I'll say is sort of units on a battlefield is the way I'll say it. You know what I mean? And even though you're from a first person perspective, there's vehicles and pelicans and Marines and enemies, and the maps are sort of larger, so you can kind of see this sort of, at least for me, I've always seen the migration of how they kind of got where they got to, and the weird hybrid of a game that it kind of, like you said, the history of it was weird. And that Macworld demo was, had elements of RTS, to it. I mean, it wasn't RTS, I guess, but it felt like a hybrid, and that's kind of how they got to the third so it was very weird. Like, they were experimenting with lots of different things, and as Bungie, was known to do back then, and they had that RTS element from Myth in their blood still, and they were, I mean, it was a big bet, because of course the Xbox, it's like, what the heck was that thing going to be? I think we all remember it. And we were, let's see, so in 2001, we were working on we had just started working on Republic Commando. And I remember
we had just started working on Jedi Starfighter. It wasn't until 2002 that Jedi Starfighter shipped, and we started working on Republic
was
Commando.
it really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so it had been out then.
I think I'm right about that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you might be. It was right around the time though. Dates aside, I just remember working on a first-person shooter, and then having Halo come out, right?
Yeah,
where we were using Unreal, we were talking about console versus PC, and ironically, having Halo come out, and then us, I guess largely because of our engine and stuff, we focused on the Xbox as the console.
Right.
And then we have this example that comes out, right? That gives you confidence that it's possible. So it's sort of like a bit of luck there for anyone working on a shooter on a console at that time, which there wasn't that many, but GoldenEye being the sort of the last previously big one, right? Where people
and
console
Perfect Dark, the sort of the other one that they did.
Which
Perfect Dark, yeah,
right. Which it was essentially
same model,
to GoldenEye, but the concept of sort of how do you do this, and they had a lot of snap targeting and kind of some traditional, like they brought over some traditional things from PC shooters. I'm talking about Rare at this point, and I don't know Halo. Bungie, maybe it's from Marathon, maybe it's from this weird hybrid, but they decided to chart their own course in some specific ways that. Yeah, I mean, it was a very interesting. And then Xbox needed a system seller. They needed something, right? They didn't have it. They didn't really have anything specifically that you could point to. And I remember talking to. So I worked with a marketing manager at LucasArts, my second tour of duty at LucasArts, who was the marketing manager on Halo back then at Microsoft. And I remember him telling me stories of when they first were getting built of Halo in for the Xbox, and they were ready, getting ready to launch the Xbox and launch Halo, and everyone knew about the deal, and it was just weird that Bungie had been purchased and all this kind of stuff, and just like how unexpected it was for everybody, and it became this sort of like internal, before they'd launched, obviously an internal hit, right, where people were, playing during work hours and staying late and LAN parties and all that kind of stuff. And it's just one of those stories, you just hear sort of through it's historical,
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting too that they were effectively PC developers. I mean, they were Mac developers and PC developers. Prior to that, I mean, they had Oni, but I think Oni also shipped on PC, as I recall. And although it also had a console version, I think Take-Two got the short end of the stick on that one, because I don't know that Oni really went anywhere. Although it had a very interesting combat system, a very complex combat system, given how few inputs it needed. It's kind of remarkable, really. I was really excited about Oni, actually. I can remember because I was familiar with Jason Jones, project, who ended up being the project leader, I guess, on Halo as well. I don't know what the term is for them, but yeah, I was kind of the person driving, and I was like, oh man, Oni's going to be amazing. And then Oni became kind of an also ran, because it went over to Take-Two essentially. I mean, Bungie finished it, but just to get it out the door so they could focus on this. I think it came out earlier in the same year. And I remember at the time being really disappointed seeing the reviews and being like, oh, I guess not, I guess I'll skip that one.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if you're aware of this, but it was developed by Bungie West, which was technically, down in Silicon Valley. Yeah. So not
the Chicago team, I guess, that was the core of Bungie. Yeah. And I think that they had acquired that team as well. I don't think they stood it up on its own. I think that they had actually bought a studio for Oni. is my recollection, and then it just didn't quite work out. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting history, and then for this thing to come out and just be amazing, just like, I mean, as an FPS on a console, it is pretty slick. I mean, there's a lot of other things to talk about, but I'll confide in the audience something I confided to you over the weekend, which is like, after playing, an hour and a half, 2 hours or whatever that we played of Halo, the next day I was like, I'd really like to play some more Halo. And I started Halo 2 because of the feel of the controls is really, I had not played Halo since it came out. Basically, we played it co-op, Andrew and I, and I just kind of forgotten. Like, I mean, I guess I played Halo 3 on the Elite 360, maybe, because it was a pack-in for me, But even that, I don't even remember playing that all that much. What I remember is when I had it in my hands, I was like, oh yeah, this was really, not an evolution, but a revolution for the console at the time, and all of it has to do really with the things like the aim assist and the I don't know how much bullet bending they do specifically. I'm sure there's some that sort of drag that they do, the magnetism, and the terms on all this stuff is all over the place. Yeah. But they then wrote the seminal paper on like, here are the 7 things you need to do to make the controls feel good, for a first-person shooter on the Xbox, and put that in Game Developer Magazine back in probably 2002 or 3, and we used that. Like, we went straight to that when we were working on our controls for Republic Commando. Yeah, everybody read that, and they were like, "Oh, yeah."
The concept of aim acceleration alone, right, being one small part of all the different things that they're doing. It's fascinating to think about how the development of like going through, and of course I have obviously some insider information on that from my past, but just like the methodologies that they were using to kind of crack that nut, and the goals that they had. And it's weird to say, but it's like, I don't have any insider information. I don't have any insider information on this, but you can kind of see the purchase being in one of those times when a purchase of a company actually does have quite a big impact on the game itself, because they were so focused on a platform at that point, right? And in a way, it's like, well, we have to figure out a way for this to work, right? We have to be better than GoldenEye or what have you. And up to this point, the model, as we've talked about when we played Doom or whatever, the model was really PC shooters and mouse and keyboard at that point, and Doom and id, right? id and Epic were owning, and Epic sort of had its thing, but it pretty sort of derivative, I guess I'd say, from a creative standpoint. Epic ended up sort of really being so much about the engine, of course, but to your point about feel, it's like, as soon as you start playing this game, it doesn't feel like anything else. It doesn't. It's made for it obviously spawned a whole different sort of mentality of shooters, especially on console. Well, specifically on console, but every time I go back to it, and I've heard good things about Infinite kind of retaining some of that feel now that it's shipped. That it moves differently. He's floatier. FOV's different. I don't know if you noticed, but the reticule is not in the center of the screen.
I did not notice,
and most people don't. And they did that for a very specific reason, which was a hotly debated topic when I was at 343, because they wanted more. They wanted that sense of verticality, right? So you actually have more space above your reticule than below.
Interesting.
So it's not centered, so it feels like, because the scale, right? Scale is a very different thing, and like Doom is all about corridors, and and this is, you have vehicles kind of mixed in there. It was just sort of revelatory, like you said, of just like, or you said revolution, but it's also revelatory, and then it's just like the combination of things. You could see the special sauce, but the feel of it, you can't put a price on that. It's just so many elements that they just kind of they found the special sauce in all of those elements, and it changed it changed how somebody uses an analog stick forever.
Forever. Yeah, no, absolutely. And and so I just wanted more of it. I did play on the PC through the Master Chief Collection, I guess is what it's called. But I played with an Xbox. I guess it's a Xbox 360 wired controller, so about as close as I can get. Like I don't have hands big enough for the original Xbox controller, because they'd have to be the size of like tennis rackets to hold that comfortably. But the Duke that was what it was called. That thing was ridiculous.
That's the nick. I think the now official nickname. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that thing's. I mean, I don't think I ever had one of those. I think I had an S. We probably had them around work, nice. But I had an S controller, I think. At the time, I probably have one downstairs. But I mean, those gigantic ones were lying around. Certainly, I probably played on them at work. They were very bad for my elbows, even back then. It's. I mean, we haven't really talked about the console itself. We probably should talk a little bit about that as well as part of it. I mean, you mentioned it. It was just the audacity of this PC company, right? I mean, they don't make PCs, but they're a PC focused company in the operating system and the applications business and the enterprise business. I mean, it's all, IBM PCs at the time, or, whatever, all x86 machines. And for that company to do, what's that?
It's like the opposite, right? Like the strategy is like the opposite of all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure they had to carve themselves out quite a bit to separate themselves from that mentality, because, Microsoft even then was not a nimble company anymore. And they were going to come out with this new piece of hardware, which they were basically going to sink money into for years. Right. I mean, they were just going to take a loss as long as it took to get a toehold in the market. Which they definitely got lucky then the next generation, where they became a much more favorable console in a lot of ways for ease of development reasons primarily. That wasn't really true of the first system. It was more like a PC, and it did have DirectX on it, so people who were familiar with PCs would find it a little more natural to work on. It had more memory than the PS2. But the PS2, had a huge library. I mean, I think that there was almost a negative impact too of what Halo did on the system, because it kind of slanted them in that direction, if you know what I mean. They were like, now we're the console that does this, whereas PS2 had this very, very wide, very deep, a lot of titles, plus it played PS1 games, that gave them a huge library advantage. So it wasn't really until the next generation with a reset of that expectation that they could sort of start to distinguish themselves. But, I think now the library is much broader and much more interesting. I think that that's something that's happened over a long time, but I felt like all through the early, first half dozen years of the Xbox as a product, Xbox original and the 360, that it was really chasing kind of one fairly narrow market. It felt like, or maybe a couple, like I guess they always had the sort of the Forza, I feel like, was pretty early for them as well. I don't know when that series started. 360 maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe 360. I don't remember, but you're totally right, and it was one of its criticisms, and it was also, both when we were launching Republic Commando, but also at other companies since then, and then when I was at Microsoft, there is a constant sort of, not debate, but just like, goal, right, to overcome that. Because, when you think about it, like when it comes to Xbox, what are the mascots? Who are the mascots, right?
Right.
And we talked a lot about mascots in previous series not long ago. And it's Chief, right? And Chief is associated with a very specific kind of game and kind of gamer, and obviously those gamers play other genres as well. But it definitely was very much that. The other thing, though, that later on with Halo 2, I think the interesting thing about that with with Microsoft and the Xbox in general, and Xbox, the original Xbox started this to some degree, is that for better or for worse, they were coming at it, like you said, from an enterprise and application company, and they brought that, again, for better or for worse, I will say, and stay vague, to the console to some degree. And what I mean by that is services started to kind of bleed into the console space for them, and of course launched on the original Xbox, and Halo 2 being the best kind of realization of that with multiplayer, and Halo 1, which we're playing now, and we'll probably play a little bit of multiplayer at some point, was the genesis of the concept of, oh yeah, multiplayer could be a thing that isn't just a server list that you join on a PC, with who knows who,
Right.
and
Right.
kind of very like grassroots and very like, cross your fingers kind of approach. And it actually can be very much more integrated into the system and into the game itself, working in partnership, which is, you could argue, a little bit more about that sort of like enterprise and application sort of approach of it being a service, or of it being something that somebody would play and come back to time and time again, right? Multiplayer
Right.
games
Well, and
on
it's
PC
also,
are typically very alienating to most people, right? And so if you could do that more easily, then
yeah. And from a technical perspective, that's true under the hood as well, right? I mean, it's a DirectX. I mean, it's named for DirectX, right? The Xbox is because of DirectX, and that is a way to unify hardware to make it less variable, right? And effectively to unify a console platform with the PC to some degree, I think was kind of the strategy. And you'll be able to woo developers who have made PC games more easily to that, although they'll be overcoming the fact that they've been working with a mouse and keyboard and now they've got this controller. And that works splendidly well with Bungie, obviously, but certainly less well with a lot of more forgotten titles from the day. I don't know, brute forces or whatever. And I don't mean to throw shade. It's just that you look at those games and you're like, okay, these are trying to emulate the success of Halo, but they don't quite get it yet. And maybe those teams went on to do more, games that felt like they had more to them, or a better fit with the console or what have you. Although I will say Brute Force did have a really good grenade throw feel. It was totally different from Halo, but it was kind of neat. I do remember that about it. That's about all I remember about it. So I did play that one co-op as too. Co-op, you forgive a lot. Anyway, I mean, it just, I think that their whole strategy, it's definitely a Microsoft console in that way, in all those ways. And I think that is something, when you talk about the services, that has helped them over time quite a bit, right? And especially with the 360, where they started really integrating all the friends lists. They were the first to have achievements as sort of a tract separate from your, individual game thing that was system-wide and required. And then the PS3 followed up with trophies, I believe, later.
Xbox Live, right? That
and
alone, like that,
right?
That,
and Xbox Live, which came with, I think Mechassault, right? Was the first title.
I think it was the first one, yeah. But of course,
it was almost. Here's a little tidbit that probably nobody knows. It was almost Jedi Starfighter. That was that game. Do you remember this? I don't know if you even remember this.
No,
we were in conversations with them. It was going to be announced at whatever, E3, I guess. Yeah, that would have made sense. Or maybe something else later in the summer. I don't remember if Xbox had a specific thing at that time, but they were going to announce it in November, and they were going to have George Lucas and Bill Gates supposedly playing Jedi Starfighter on stage when they revealed Xbox Live.
That rings a bell. Yeah.
But a little game that was having some trouble, and they were having trouble getting through cert, ended up derailing that plan because LucasArts was like, well, we're not going to give you that unless you're going to give us a little bit of a pass on getting this game through. And I'm not going to give that game away. And LucasArts expected Microsoft to blink, and Microsoft said, well, we got this mech game. I guess we'll do that instead. So that's what happened. So a little bit of unknown history there. Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't have been us doing the Xbox work anyway, because we had another studio, Secret Level, who did that work for us and ported the original as well in the special edition and all that stuff. But that was the plan.
Yeah. No. Yeah, I forgot about that, but it is ringing a bell.
Yeah,
but I mean, live, you know, I mean, like that was another, again, it's, I don't know, a little bit like GamePass, right? It's like as GamePass is happening now, it's like they're definitely thinking, they're coming at it at a sort of another orthogonal direction, the way Nintendo does, right? Nintendo has their, and you know, Sony is just sort of the gorilla who just keeps going, you know, and they're getting maybe a little more nimble as they go, but and some of it is needing to survive and needing to change and adapt in Microsoft's case, right? And thinking outside the box. And I think they've had some interesting leaders in there too to kind of chart some of that course, like Phil, I think. But
I would agree.
It's just a, you know, when you look at, for instance, Sega's history, right, who no longer has a console, and to some degree around this era, right, with the Dreamcast and sort of like their strategies and trajectories and what didn't end up working for them and what's still around and what isn't still around. It's just sort of, you know, I don't know how many books there are written about the console wars at this point, but you know, well-tread territory.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and interesting there's actually a really good one that I have that one of these days I should probably read. Somebody gave it to me. Hi, Dennis, if you're listening. I'll get to it someday, I promise, once I get through all these library books, which is the whole library. Okay, well, I think we've talked probably enough about sort of the first-person shooter on a console and the consoles themselves. We should start turning to the game. There's a lot to talk about, but let's start first with sort of the intro level, because it does introduce so many mechanics. I mean, I made some notes that were more like that there's a lot of detail in these early cutscenes with, like, you know, it's the science fiction soup of like, oh, and the Covenant and, you know, the AI whose butt you see in the first scene and whatever. There's kind of a lot going on in this enormous ship, and they're being chased. The very Star Wars kind of start as well, you know, with the big, what's it called? Pillar of Autumn, you know, passing by the camera very slowly and stately, you know, and then, you know, there's all these things on their tail. But they, you know, they reveal that, you know, they're being chased, and, you know, well, we better freeze, you know, unthaw him or whatever they're doing. And that's you that they're talking about. So why don't you start us through the tutorial stuff? Because, you'll pick up on things that I missed, I'm sure. So let me hand it over to you.
Yeah, and I don't remember if I never really got information about sort of like the progression of this stuff while I was there. But if I take a step back, assuming I hadn't worked at Microsoft on Halo, the opening level. We also know about Microsoft and the Xbox division is that they have a great usability lab, right? Mm-hmm. And I would like to think that the opening of this game, you know, had a lot of benefits from that, as well as obviously Bungie's, you know, being you know, top of their game and being a great studio. But, you know, sort of one of the for a game developer, I remember talking about it with people at work, especially the Jeff Joneses of the world who just adored this game. The simple thing that when you wake up, as an aside, I wanted to mention that even though the Covenant's coming, I do feel like people are not as worried as they should be in this whole opening section before.
They all seem very calm.
They're like, okay, all right, yep, they're coming. We better do this, and then let's do this, and oh, can you look up? So. But anyway, the whole, you know...
But also here, I'm going to need you to protect this and, you know, just download this huge AI that is controlling all the ship systems into basically a little Nintendo cartridge. Yeah, here, can you just take this? I don't know. Maybe that's not all that unrealistic, but...
All of humanity is humanity's knowledge on this one chip. Yeah, so the stakes are high. That was, I think, a part of their sort of melodramatic success and stuff like that, right? Good high science fiction, as we might call it. But yeah, I mean, so you open up and they immediately know you're playing on sticks because that's the only thing you can do, and they test your. They know also that inverted axes is a question for people, right? So they had a brilliant test of that is not just a setting, it's actually integrated into the level design and the scripting itself, which they do multiple times. They do that for something like the motion tracker, right? They actually have a sort of sub-objective that's related to the motion tracker where they teach you and they turn that on, and they turn on everything piece by piece.
Yeah.
They don't even give you a gun right away. They just say, look up and down.
It's a while. Yeah.
Was this comfortable for you? Yes or no? I think they might have changed actually some of that for the special edition, by the way. But largely they're testing, and they have you look up at lights. And I think
my recollection of the original game was there was no, do you want to switch it?
Confirmation.
It was just,
you just do it.
You just do it. And I remember us all being just like, whoa, you can do that? Yeah. It felt like on the PS2, it would have been like, no, you have to present a dialogue that says, would you like to use the x-axis this way for the PS2 TM controller registered TM, DualShock TM, like it felt very free in a way that was really mind blowing at the time. I mean, I can't overstate that. For sure.
Yeah, it was a head slap. It was a head palm against your forehead moment too for all of us. Of like, yeah, that's just brilliant. Why didn't, and maybe it's because the console was just shipping and, the concept of TCRs for them, or any sort of, testing, they had them early on, but this was a console that's being birthed, right? I mean, and this was the first, this was like really the first real big game. And so they kind of were doing whatever they thought was right, and there's a little bit of that sort of, I don't know, Wild West feel to it or what have you, right? Of like, yeah, we're just gonna do it, and it's sort of, they're rebels. They wanted to be seen as rebels, I think, even though it's this big corporation.
I mean, I think when you're starting something new like that, you have the opportunity to look at what others do. I'm certain that they knew, what it was like to develop for a PlayStation, which had 7 or 8 or 10 years of TCRs at that point, or TRCs, or whatever they're called,
they
which becomes just kind of stultifying, right? It just, I think Xbox had TCRs and Sony had TRCs, but the thing that was really wild was like, they went and kind of said, well, do we really need all of that? There becomes a sort of momentum of like, this is just how we do things here, right? that happens with once these things are established, and those lists kind of only get added to as you go on, and that's happened, right, with Microsoft as well. It's not like that they're any different in that regard. They just came along at this point and could not do that if they chose, which was kind of cool.
And I think it did it. Like when you think of the rigor that Nintendo puts into the maybe their games,
right?
Comparatively, I think
the seal of quality.
It did bite them from time to time. Microsoft, I mean, right? Because they were still getting, but that's, I think, to be expected. But this opening level, I think, it's there's a lot of derivative science fiction going on. It's definitely, it's got the Space Marine thing going. Chief is definitely a memorable, sort of faceless avatar, so to speak, right?
Right.
A man of few words, but when he says them, you remember them. And so I think the script is good. And the context is pretty, you're being boarded. But the cool thing about the opening level, it's obviously very linear, but I think that there's immediately a mystery about, like you mentioned, some of the proper nouns that they start throwing at you right away, which is definitely take it from me, one of the challenges of the franchise. But I just think they do a wonderful job, and I haven't played this level in a while, so I didn't remember everything, but you're very adeptly introduced to a lot in a short amount of time. The enemies are mysterious. There's even some humor in there with the grunts. You see some of the early AI behavior that was pretty cool for the time. You see Marines working with you, right? You can help keep alive, or they will die. You can also accidentally kill them,
Right.
but it's still pretty constrained. And then, like I said, they take basically every mechanic as well as HUD element, and they dole it out over the course of the whole level. And by the end, even in the beginning, they have some great fiction around like turning on your heart meter, right? And it fills up, and they have some good audio that reinforces that. Later, when you go down to low health, that same heartbeat sound comes back on. So you've heard it before. They have a whole sequence when turning your shields on. The shields alone are a fundamental part of how Halo works, and different from what a lot of the other shooters are out there, right? Your shields recharge. I'll have a whole like soapbox on that later, not today.
Yeah.
But they fictionalize it, right? So it's like people retain stuff better when you
have context. Yeah. You have context for why these things are, and splitting it up like that, it's telling a story of basically the rebooting of this guy's systems that embeds that stuff in your brain. The only thing that they didn't do for me that I missed was the weapon swap. At a certain point, I'm like, don't I have another gun? Or actually, I might have hit a button at the wrong... I might have fat fingered the Y button, and I had the pistol in the hand. I'm like, wait a minute, how did I get this? And I'm like, that's one of my that I don't think they do, and it's not signaled in the interface in any way. And then I was like, oh, that's right, I have two weapons. Like I'd forgotten up to that moment. I was like, oh, of course. So yeah, they did have. I'm pretty positive they had text come on screen, but they didn't turn it into an objective. Right.
Which, like for instance, with just the opening room, but also which gives you your shield and your axis, you're inverted or not, your y-axis. But then things I mentioned the motion tracker because it's a pretty fundamental sort of like concept, right, for a shooter to have like a motion tracker that works that way. And so they had like a little thing where it's like, oh, I don't know if you remember it, but it's like, oh, don't go that way. There's some enemies out there. And so you kind of have to move through the ventilation or the behind the scenes sort of corridors until you see on the motion tracker that there's no red. So it's like, I don't know, it's just very clever introductions of things that I just think rather than doing a tutorial, you're going to retain much better. Now on the flip side of that, there are a lot of other things going on in the mechanics and the systems of the game that some people don't ever know is happening, that they never teach you, which I think is a shame, and we would always debate a lot about. And there's some pretty cool things in Infinite that help with some of that. Basically, I'm talking about like damage types and how certain weapons work differently than other weapons, and those sorts of things that you can kind of discover, but it's not as overtly told to you. But we can get into that later.
For sure. I mean, for me, I guess what happens is you're given your pistol. I think somebody hands you one basically.
By keys, he gives you his pistol.
Right, by keys, right. And then basically as you're leaving, at some point you'll pick up another weapon, and that's when it switches to be your primary. It probably tells you. But it's like, and then you have two. And I guess that's something I just kind of skipped over because I was very much in the moment of,
it's quick. I
was very caught up in, oh my God, there's all these aliens. Oh, good. Now I've got a submachine gun or whatever it is. A battle rifle, assault rifle. I don't know.
Assault rifle.
Yeah. So you can see how well I retain some of the fictional elements. I'm just like, okay, I've got a faster gun now. But they also do the readout in the world on the gun, right? Don't they do that?
Yeah.
Which is real nice. Another thing that we stole. We actually were like, I don't know, 2 feels too restrictive coming from some of our PC player backgrounds. So we found a way to have more than 2 weapons. But I mean, it has so much. I think it's this whole section is really good. And you mentioned the AI. I don't think we'll get into it too much because we're already at 45 minutes. But introducing these clear, deadly, and mirroring mechanics. Guys in the Covenant, they also have shields, and you can see their shields go down. Mm-hmm. So it's also reflecting back to you like they're like me, so they're dangerous too, right? The grunts are not, and they reflect back that they're not by being very silly, right? In a lot of ways, like you shoot them and they'll turn and run. they'll break. They have no morale. It's like one shot and they're like, and they start and they say funny things. Like there is the comedy, but you get a bunch of them together, kind of are a threat because they're low, first of all, so you have to tilt down a little bit. But then there's a lot of sort of combined firepower maybe headed your way, but they're easy to break. So it's like, so you see these other guys who are like, oh, they also have shields. Oh no, and they will charge you and they will try to melee you, and which is something you should also be doing. Is all reinforcing this is what the game is, at least in this part. So
it's very, and what we're going to talk about a lot, I think, over the course of the series is really just the sandbox nature of it, and that the systems and mechanics are so blended together so well, because every, and to your point on the AI, like there's also sort of an implied hierarchy. So if you kill an elite, then nearby some grunts, then the grunts will react to that and sometimes run away, right? Because they're afraid because their superior has been killed and things like that.
Right. There also seem to be two types of grunts. Am I right about that?
Yeah, there's
like a gold and a red one or something.
Yep. And they're silhouettes, like they're the other side of the enemies that you really are presented with in this first level is very different silhouettes, very clear silhouettes, and audio design, and you really have a sense of target prioritization, right? Versus say a soldier game like a Medal of Honor at the time or something like that, right? Where it's just like, it's all people, right? And they might have different guns, but it's like target prioritization, and how you're going to use the sandbox is a lot more difficult. And so I just always appreciated that. And then I guess I'll use diegetic sort of choices they made where every enemy drops the weapon that they're using. And so that's another decision you can make, right? Of like, okay, I want to get the needler. That guy's shooting a needler at me. I'm going to go take him down. He will drop it. If I get him sooner, he'll have more ammo in the needler. So it's like, there's just these layers of decisions that players can make when you're in the heat of the battle, and the battles are very dynamic. They're going to be pretty different every time you play. If you go through and make some different decisions, like it's very, very systemic as far as shooters. And usually the level design, this first level is very linear, so you don't really get to see a lot of that. But in the next level, you get to see sort of how
you see it open up.
Things can change.
Yeah, pretty dramatically. Even just as you're approaching, that first, I don't know, I guess it's sort of a ramp up. It's you're climbing up this hill and you're fighting enemies on that hill, and it's like, oh man, like you already have some obstructions. I think there's like some trees or something, not a ton, but you're already seeing, and that becomes more and more as you play deeper into that level. You're seeing like, oh man, like, I can really press in this game. I can really, really push and get myself into a lot of trouble because now there's a lot of folks around me, and I was really, really appreciative of how, of course it's, we're playing on 2021 hardware, a game from 2001. So obviously the performance is significant. I mean, it's running for me. I'm sure it could run it whatever it wants, to be honest. But it is pretty. I mean, I remember even back in the day, and this is a game I played through all the way co-op. It's actually the only way I played it. It's kind of amazing that way. So I mean, it's super smooth.
The co-op alone too, right? That's another. That was another big.
Another huge thing we'll have to talk about, and maybe try to play a level or two that way.
I wanted to ask you. I forgot to ask in pre-show. Are you turning the anniversary edition art off ever to check the? Did you know you? Could
I didn't know you could do that.
So if you on the controller, if you press the select whatever the left.
The back button,
is,
the
back
button back then.
Press try it out. It's instantaneous.
Nice.
You can do it anytime, and you basically turn off the anniversary art. And though I think the anniversary art is quite good. I think it was Saber Interactive that did that port for 343. I think though it is a great upgrade, I think there is something pretty special about the original art for that game. It's very simple yet epic. It's very like minimalistic, and obviously they were working with constraints, so there's good reasons for that to be the case. But the lighting changes obviously quite heavily. One of the other cool things they do with that mode is when you turn it off, the sound goes back to the original sound as
neat.
well, which is super fascinating because you hear the difference immediately. And so anyway, I would recommend sort of in some key rooms or stuff, turn that off and kind of just look at the difference, because they did a lot with a little. And I think part of the charm of the game back then was also like how epic it felt, but still what they were able to do on that console at the time.
So. I mean, I think the silhouettes would honestly be even stronger.
Yeah,
for being a little blockier, to be honest. I mean, I now that you're saying that, I'm like, oh, I'm glad I have that option, because I would really like to see it in that context. Maybe I'll start a legendary parallel. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what you do to make add more detail, right? Is you add noise, because you're not going to remodel probably everything, and like and definitely things like the terrain don't particularly look tons better. Right, the terrain is itself kind of blurry, and the not blurry is too strong, but not as there's not the same pixel density in the terrain as there are in, say, the buildings, right?
Right. So you should go back to you should look at the old.
Yeah, no, I know it's probably similar, and
it's pretty fascinating though.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. I think that's awesome. I'm always appreciative of people doing that. I think LucasArts was among the first, right, with the Secret of Monkey Island re-release, right? They had done that mode where you could just literally any time press a button and swap to the original Scum graphics from whatever ages ago. So yeah, it's super cool and super valuable for people who want to see what the experience was originally like. So I appreciate you calling that out, because I'll definitely check that out. I think we actually should turn to feedback, because we're coming up on an hour, and it's
let's do it.
20 minutes or so. We're going to cover. There's so much. We had so many topics, and I don't think this is going to be a long series, just because the game itself is not terribly long. But maybe we'll squeeze out a little bit more at the end to play some multiplayer or something like that, to check it out.
I think we should do some multiplayer. Yeah, we should do at least one session of multiplayer. I don't. Well, although I have GamePass, so I would be able to play it. But I do think we need to play Infinite, not for selfish reasons, but I do think there's some topics.
Yeah, I mean,
episode.
I'm happy to play it now. Like I said, I was totally into this so much that I was like, let me start the sequel. That I also was like, kind of eyeing that Infinite a little bit, like maybe that would be a thing for me. So I know you have Game Pass and all that. I don't, because I don't play enough games other than what we play for the podcast to make it reasonable for me. But yeah, it's definitely no. I'd be happy to be honest. I'll just get Troy to give me a copy, right? I can do that, right? I don't think it works that way, unfortunately.
No, I don't know if he has any codes, yeah, the couple levels that we played up through the middle of Truth and Reconciliation and got to keys.
Got to rescuing keys from the jail cells, basically.
So that's where we stopped. But we'll cover those, because obviously topics to hit in both of those sections. So we'll cover that next time.
Yeah, that was more for just to play a good sized chunk. But like after I played for half an hour, it's like there's a lot to talk about in half an hour. But I was like, are we just going to play half an hour? Like that didn't feel right. So we played a little further, but just give us more to talk about next time. All right, well, that's cool. Let's turn then to email. We always mention reviews because, of course, we love to receive them. Please don't tell us about how you hate our wokeness. We don't care. So you can also send email to gameclub@gmail.com. Well, it's the paradox of intolerance. Karl Popper brought up last time by somebody who wrote into that email address. So why don't you go ahead and take the first one, sir?
Okay, treasure and replayability in RE4 from Zachary Cranover. Zachary's back. Awesome.
Yes.
I can't wait.
There are we have multiple Zachs on this one. This is not the one who answered our first question.
Oh, okay.
Maybe our first and second question. So there's been multiple Zacharies. I'm just saying. But Zachary, I think Crown Over did also write to us that we maybe read another one. Anyway, go.
Yeah, I think there's a whole series we could do on Zachary.
On just Zacharies.
Zacharies and Resident Evil 4. There's some weird universe connection going on there. So he says, hi, Tim and Brett. As I was listening to this week's episode of the cast, which was far long ago, I figured I ought to add to your discussion the treasure combinations missability, adding to the game's replayability. Although I can't say with any degree of certainty that combining treasures for increased sell value was intentionally made highly missable, I can also easily imagine that maybe that being the case. The Resident Evil series has always been known for placing a heavy emphasis on replayability, be it via different protagonists or unlockable weapons, outfits, modes, and RE4 is no different. In terms of the devs failing to make treasure combinations explicit, though, I think you've touched on something that ties heavily into the game's difficulty. When playing on normal, which is the one most selectable from the game's outset, RE4's difficulty is highly adaptive, with gameplay being made easier the worse you perform, and harder the better you perform. Because of this, one could conceivably complete the entire game without placing many resources into upgrading RE4's bevy of weapons. In short, combining treasures isn't all that big of a deal. Okay, interesting. So I did not know that the dynamic difficulty was based on the difficulty level. Once you've completed a playthrough, however, you unlock professional mode, in which the game's difficulty is always at its maximum. In this mode, spending resources judiciously is incredibly important. Presumably, the player will have figured out at some time in their previous playthroughs that treasures may be combined to afford greater payouts, and this ultimately amounts to the players feeling as if they discovered, rather than being spoon-fed, a mechanic without which higher level play is rendered all but impossible. The player feels competent in a manner similar to that in which they perceived Leon to be. As always, thanks for the cast and keep up the great work. P.S. If you wish to avoid mechanical spoilers, please ignore the following 2 sentences. I do not wish to ignore them, or I'm okay to be spoiled.
One of them I think I already mentioned to you because I had read this email.
Oh, okay. I've noticed that you two haven't made any mention of flash grenades performing one-hit kills on exposed plagas. Yes, you did mention that. That's, mind-blowing.
That's where this came from. Yeah, that's cool.
As this is an incredibly useful mechanic, I thought it worth mentioning on the off chance that you complete your playthroughs without discovering it. So yeah, that's a good one. I mean, I get what he's saying. There's always that weird decision that you try to make on how hard to hide something or how easy to find something,
Right,
and I don't know this. I guess so. I guess I'm buying what he's selling. You know what you're buying, what you're selling. I guess I'm buying what he's selling here for the most part, but I don't know. I just feel like it's just a little bit too hard to find.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I on the other hand, counterpoint. Like I've played games where the sort of hidden things are very hidden, but they're very necessary. Like games where, you have to find secrets, because if you don't find the secrets, you're not getting enough, I don't know, equivalent XP or power level or whatever, to be able to complete the game or continue in the game. And this game, because it has this dynamic adaptive difficulty, makes that not so important. So it's okay if you don't discover a thing, for a while. And you don't also have in addition to the survival horror, have this additional pressure of like, oh my God, I've got to search everywhere, because one of the strategies you'll probably be using in your first playthrough is like, I'm going to run past things, like, especially if you've played earlier Resident Evils, and it's very common to like go into a room, see that there's a lurching zombie that's not moving very fast, and just like run around it. Like, I mean, you did it, in that section you described, in order to kind of channel them all to a place where you're like, now I can mow you down. So I think that there's definitely a lot of value in not making it too important to the player. But I would, I definitely was at a certain point, I'm like, that looks like it goes to something, and then, happen to come across a description and be like, oh man, I've missed stuff. So that's the part I wanted to avoid, is the, oh man, I missed, XYZ. Especially in not being able to go back and knowing there was a treasure I hadn't gotten. Like, I mean, there was just a lot of that. So
on the flip side, though, yep. I mean, you're right. And in this case, I think it's appropriately placed so it doesn't become frustrating if you do miss it. But on the flip side, if I did unlock professional and then I played professional and then I got to a point when I was like, man, there's no way I would ever be able to upgrade this or whatever. Like, how would I ever do that? It's impossible. I'd have to play the game 10 times. And then I might be kind of bummed, to find out later. So luckily professional is not the core mode. So it's kind of forgivable in that case, because it's like if you're playing professional, you know what you're getting yourself into. But
you've played it already, right? I mean, so yeah. Thanks, Zachary.
Thank you.
Yeah, I should probably note, I actually never say this. Sometimes we say people's last names, and it's because they put it in the way they sign the email. So I don't like take what's in your from line in the email as your name. I take whatever you sign it as. So it's not as to preserve privacy for people who care. And I'm noticing that both our next writer and Zachary, of course, provided their last names. I was just wondering, just saying, if anybody was curious how I make that decision, it's purely on how you sign off. So sometimes we have last names, sometimes we don't. In any case, the subject this time is, if that is your real subject, and it's from Nick Miller. Dear Brett, if that is his real name, and a little suspense there. We'll find out at the end. Dear Brett and Tim, I just want to start off by saying that I am currently waiting for a collector's copy of Star Wars Republic Commando from Limited Run Games. Well over 15 years later, and I'm still happy to buy it and play it. Such a classic, not only for FPSs, but also for Star Wars canon. Thanks, Nick. That's awesome. 2 questions. For context, I started getting into game design concepts in the early 2010s when I was in high school. Oh, yeah, me too. The first and only outlets I had at the time were game reviewers on YouTube, reviews from Metacritic and IGN, and Discourse with Friends. As brutal as his reviews are, hearing Yahtzee from Zero Punctuation articulate about the games he was playing helped me personally to be able to articulate about games and game mechanics before I had a good grasp of ideas and language. This led me down a path of looking for more and more media that shares the same articulate nature. From magazines to documentaries, like Indie Game on Netflix, and podcasts wherever I could find them. All of this inspired me to take some classes on programming to start playing around with game engines like GameMaker and Unity as a hobby. My first question, would either of you two be willing to do an episode with a game reviewer or critic to get a different perspective? I think it would be an interesting episode to hear the perspective of someone who isn't a game dev. Pick your brains for a change of pace. Perhaps on one of the games both of you worked on together? It would also be interesting to hear how games journalism / reviews and alternate media like gaming podcasts affect the gaming industry as a whole, both positive and negative. It certainly has opened the door for me to get into the scene. There are a lot of interesting topics to cover with this, the glorification of game design and development without the acknowledgement of how difficult it is, for example. You both have also made references to reviews that only see what's in the box and don't get to see how exactly that's they got what's inside the box for Republic Commando. It's an interesting expectation versus reality relationship between what you would think to be a more fun mechanic in a game versus developing that idea into a reality that rarely is talked about on the consumer side of things. I'll pause here because there's another long second question. So I don't know that we've ever talked about that, a critic.
It's not a bad idea. Yeah, I think
so. Many of them have their own podcasts, but they aren't often, honestly, in dialogue necessarily with developers. So it would be interesting. It's hard to know how to pick that person for a particular game. So that would be something we'd have to really think about.
I mean,
if we ever do Suikoden 2, we could get Jason Schreier. I'm sure that guy will talk about that game to anybody. He's
right.
out on a street corner in New York right now, with a sign that says "Ask me about Suikoden 2." But
yeah, I mean, there. I think people know, because so many of our audience probably listens to so many of them. Like you generally know what they're fans of, so I'm sure we could line it up, and it would be interesting to be honest, it might be interesting to play a whole series with them and have them be on every episode of the series.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
That would be interesting.
Like find somebody who's like a fan of whatever. And like you said, with Jason or somebody. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's plenty of content out there with this in there, but maybe the way that we play, obviously some others definitely do deep dives. MinMax does a deep dive. Obviously, Rebel FM used to do a deep dive game club kind of thing. So there's some of that stuff out there. But
yeah, worth thinking about. And then the second question, this is another sort of would you kindly, would either of you two be willing to do an episode on a more modern indie title, or perhaps a saga of episodes where each game of your choosing gets its own episode? I would love to hear an episode where you guys break down the modern indie sphere in all its facets, from Super Meat Boy to The Binding of Isaac to Limbo to Undertale to the overwhelmingly diverse library that Steam has to offer, and many more. Indie game has really evolved to take on a niche that bigger titles just can't fill. Indie side of things is talked about a lot, but never really delved into. A lot of the indie games I've mentioned are about as old as Skyrim at this point. I think it would be interesting to hear you guys contrast indie games and development over the decades and talk about how indie development impacts the medium today for the big guys in the AAA side of things. Like how some small innovations within indie games tend to snowball and slowly make their way into big development, like the rogue or roguelite genre. It would also be interesting to hear indie development to be contrasted to larger scale development in terms of development focus, design principles, and budget. Given both of your experience and knowing that Brett has scaled down to smaller and more personal teams, and Tim has been working with the Halo series, you both would be perfect for it. Maybe in a final episode with an indie developer for the final epilogue of that episode's saga. I'm currently cherry-picking games in DGC's sizable backlog while I work, but I haven't gotten through all of them. If there are episodes that cover these topics, I apologize in advance. Thanks for the great podcast. You both do fantastic work week to week. We'll be listening in soon. My real name, Nick Miller. I don't know that we've really talked about indie games. I mean, Doom, technically an indie game. And really kind of an indie aesthetic, honestly, at the time, to some degree. But I know that's not what you really mean. You mean the sort of rise of the indies in the last 10 to 15 years or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, it's largely, like you said, it's largely a product of the timing and sort of the restrictions we put on ourselves for the podcast. I think it's a good point though, and a good topic. And to be honest, I definitely should play more indie games than I play, which I think is definitely an embarrassment that I am in that state, because I don't think I'm as educated as I'd like to be. Like Undertale, like I know it was the whole thing, but I could not tell you what the thing was, right. Which is kind of a good example. But there's also, how indie games sort of migrated from things like Summer of Arcade to other places, and became more of a thing. And some of the early ones like Braid or whatever, so there's various, there is a history there, I guess. I almost feel like it's a whole nother podcast. But I think it's something we will have to hit at some point for sure. When we hit it, I don't know. And I think in many cases we wouldn't. I think they would probably, a lot of them would deserve multiple episodes anyway. So I don't think you need to give them the short shrift or anything. But
most of them are sizable experiences in their own right, and worthy of thoughtful exploration. Certainly I've taught indie games a little bit. I actually we had a great class once where we compared a Call of Duty game, a war game, with This War of Mine, which was that 11-bit Studios game, which is a very different war experience. We talked about how the mechanics of these two games about war, led to different feelings, right? And just kind of like what were the keywords you took out of. They played both games. I don't know that we played a specific Call of Duty, but it was sort of like, you guys have all played these, so throw out some things that are from that mechanics, that are in those games, kill streaks and whatever, versus this other game that we all played together, which was an indie game, and that was today cool. Just a great experience to sort of talk about that and explain to them and show them like, here, here's what you feel playing this game, like, because that was the second part of the exercise. What do you feel? And I just was like drawing lines from like kill streak to empowerment, like, or whatever, it's just like, Fiero. They didn't use Fiero because that's kind of a nerd term for it, but like the feeling, you're like, moments or whatever. And then comparing that with the very different feelings of this other game and like how they felt playing that, and it was a really fun way to break things down. So cool. We had one more. Oh, I think it's pretty short actually, now that I think about it. So why don't you go ahead and hit it? Thanks, Nick.
Yes. Leon Age from Ben Zaug. Hello, Ben from Iowa. You guys talked about the ages of Leon and Ashley, and Tim specifically went yuck in quotes. I did. In Resident, I think he means in Resident Evil 4. Leon is 26-27 as he was born in 1977, and the game takes place in 2004. Ashley is 20. This is the same age difference as my parents. They did meet 2 ages later, 22 and 29. Thanks, Ben from Iowa, Zaug. I did read ahead on this one because it was short, and totally understand what you're saying, Ben. However, then I would say they did a poor job representing a 20-year-old woman in the game because... Oh,
I thought you were going to go a different direction. I thought you were going to say about his parents. I mean, Ben, yuck. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Oh, you went there. Okay. We love you, Ben. We love you. And I know what you're saying technically, but to be honest, like whatever the ages really are, the point for me, what the yuck was coming more from the representation they have of Ashley is not good, right? She is sort of, what's the term?
Infantilized a little bit.
Infantilized, right? Some.
I didn't read her as 20 for sure. Like
definitely not 20. No.
Yeah, I didn't read her. I read her as more like 16 for one thing, just like how I read her. But I will also say, like, we're in the person of Leon in the game, and we're not 27.
Yeah.
So, like, I think there's a certain like natural aging of of the protagonist to more match us. Like, not that I was going to make him 40 like me, but that. but I was gonna. He was gonna be in the mid. He was gonna be more in the mid 30s. Or something like that, right? It was kind of like where I was starting to think of him, like when I thought of that at all, which is obviously not often, but that was kind of like, oh, okay. I mean, because he's also like on call with the president. Like, I don't think that just happens when you're 26 or whatever. That seems like a lot.
He seems older than 27 to me too. I mean, if that's what you're saying. I mean, his career or whatever.
But the other thing maybe it makes sense within the fiction of like that being his age, but it's also not. It doesn't read that way to me. I guess just like
no, it doesn't.
Who he is and like the very important mission he's on is like I don't know. That's a sort
they
of
just send this 27-year-old to go do this thing. Yeah. I mean, it's whether they had even said the ages or not, which maybe they did in the manual. It really is just about the presentation of it, right? And the way that they're actually showing the characters is I think the trickier part, right? You can slap a number on anybody, but I mean, a 20-year-old Ashley should be picking up a gun and she's freaking taking care of herself, but she can't, so anyway, we could go on and on, but understand your point, Ben, for sure. Thanks for writing it.
Yeah, for sure. It's not the stated ages that necessarily bother us. It's definitely the apparent ages. Which
I'm sure that your mom and dad at their age in a zombie apocalypse, they'd be doing just fine, both of them.
Yeah, exactly.
At those ages.
All right. Well, you can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
At Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
He is also going to be streaming like in moments at twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. You are now playing RE7? Yes.
I went backwards and started 7. The most terrifying Resident Evil game I've ever played.
It is pretty tough. It's pretty scary.
The whole first section. I don't know how it changes, but this house is just... I really am excited to play more, but I really don't want to play more.
Yeah. It is pretty terrifying. Yep. Good luck, sir. I was glad. I mean, it's a good game to stream. I streamed it too, and so it was good to have some people with me on the journey. And of course, our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo is by Mark Garcia. Have fun unsealing the hushed casket this week, and good night.
Yeah, that was a good one. Good night.